The DIESOL podcast,
Developing Innovation in English as a Second or Other Language.
episode 69, Fun with Forms.
Welcome to DIESOL. This is episode 69. We are your hosts. I'm Brent Warner.
And I'm Michelle Reyes. Hey, Brent.
Whew, it's hot. We're in a heat wave here in California while you are relaxing.
Enjoying rain.
Yeah, you're maxing, relaxing in Texas. It's supposed to be the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, but we get those floods, like the end of the world floods.
Oh yeah, well.
So pick your death.
Well,
Scorching or flood.
Yeah, we'll probably get the earthquakes. We'll get the fires too. So we've got plenty of natural disasters to come and crush us here in California. So we'll make it work somehow. We are back to school. Yeah. I don't know if we said that we're back to school in one of the previous episodes, but now we're really properly back to school.
Back to school.
A lot of people listening right now are after Labor Day, that's when kind of classes start, whatever else it is going on. I've been back we've had 2 proper full weeks of class now, so I'm back in the swing of things.
And I never left, so for those of you who work all year round, I feel you.
Yes, Esol is.
We are all rolling our eyes here at the people who say we're back to school.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also kind of fair to say, even those who get the summer vacation,
You're not really, yeah.
I mean, how many teachers do you know that have been going to PDs and going to conferences and replanning out their lessons, and now they're switching switching modalities. Now they're coming back to physical schools. I mean, there's just so many different parts. So even for those of you who got a quote unquote summer break, maybe Eshel's not going to be kind to you because you got a little time off. Esol is so heartless, but...
Okay, let's just welcome fall.
Welcome
We're
fall.
Welcoming fall.
Welcome fall. Welcome new classes. So we did, so today we're going to kind of focus in on that a little bit and share a little bit about how we might approach the new semester. So, Esol, as you know I like to say, let's jump in.
So Brent, with new classes starting, I mean, even if you didn't have a break, we're probably still starting a new semester, a new term, a new quarter, whatever it is, or constantly receiving new students. One of the areas that I think often comes to mind with a new class, no matter when you're starting, is how you're going to build rapport with students.
Yeah. And
in conversations that you and I have had pre-show, we talk about how that is so important and critical, and maybe we know about it as teachers, so maybe it's not as important to define it. But I think it is human nature in general that we all want to be included, we all want to be cared about, and we all want to know that we count, right? And so that's essentially what rapport is in the classroom. I think something that I always go back to is that strong rapport is vital in the classroom, because if students find a meaningful connection in what they're doing, then they're more likely to have more respect for the teacher, for the class, for the content they're learning. There's likely going to be more trust. And if students trust that the teacher is giving them something of value, and the students find value in it, then they're more likely to be motivated. Perhaps maybe where there wasn't motivation. I know that I've had teachers that I loved, and maybe the content of whatever I was doing wasn't enjoyable. But because I trusted that my teacher cared, I did it, and then later on reflected and realized, oh yeah, that was helpful. But if it had been a different teacher presenting that to me, I would have probably thrown that assignment away. And 100%. You see that with sometimes I always go back to my algebra 2 teacher who never really cared, and I'm sure he was taking on the class as a side gig. He was a basketball coach. So that I just knew he didn't care to explain when I made a mistake, and I didn't learn anything. But then a different teacher later taught me the same thing, and it was different, and I learned it. Anyway, we're talking today about rapport.
Well, I want to follow up on that too, because I think a lot of times we think about this in terms of students, and I think this conversation is very common online with like the caring teacher crowd, but there's also, there's a huge group out there that are just like not really tied in with that world, right? And so we do want to think about it with our own experiences, even as adults. Like sometimes we're like, oh yeah, when we were kids, whatever, like that stuff, but it didn't really matter, right? But like think about it now as an adult, right? Same type of thing. It could be with your coworkers, it could be with a presentation that
boss.
you go to, right? Yeah, and when you feel that connection with those people, you are more likely to want to do a better job, right? Or you're more likely to get engaged with the materials or whatever else it is. And so it absolutely does make a difference to spend that time to build some rapport. And I think there's no there's no real shortage of information out there about why this is important,
Right.
and it should be fairly self-explanatory, but I still did grab a little bit of research here, and again, I think you could just find tons and tons of different things, but I thought this was slightly interesting just because we're still kind of, there are people who are staying online with their teaching, there are people who are going back in person, there are people who are going hybrid, and so I did find this article called Building Rapport to Improve Retention and Success in Online Classes. And that was by Glazier in 2016. So again, pre-pandemic, and so there's kind of some of that conversation. But I think that a lot of this still rings true because it was pretty well resourced and well thought out. And so they were talking about retention rates for students, right? Students, especially so for me, community college, students might drop out. There's all sorts of different things, and they talked about reasons for retention or reasons for losing retention, and we're not going to have time to get into all of them, but they talk about three key factors, and one was student characteristics. The second one is environmental factors, and then the third one that I kind of want to talk about is the actual course and instructor features. So we've talked a lot about some of these things. So like design, like how your class is designed and how it actually looks when you're going through the information online. We know now, at least anecdotally, but I think there's also like quantitative research on it, which is that students are dropping classes when professors don't have well-designed LMS systems, right? So if you're using Canvas or Blackboard or whatever else it is, like if it's just kind of like a dump of information, students, and I've heard my own students say this, are like, oh yeah, I dropped that class because that teacher didn't know how to work with anything. They didn't know how they were organizing things, right?
Yikes.
So I know that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But here's one of the quotes that I thought was interesting from that article. It said, student-faculty interaction has the greater influence on perceived learning and engagement. Thus, some scholars have suggested that the difference in retention rates between online and in-person classes is due to the lack of contact between faculty and students. So, we know we have wonderful online teachers who listen to the show, and so it's like, I'm going to point out that clearly it's not talking about people who have been active and pay attention to how they're interacting with their students.
And
right?
know how to structure their courses.
Correct, right? But we also know that there are a lot of people that haven't thought about those things or haven't spent that time. So in the California community colleges, actually a part of accreditation for these online courses is they have this key term, and it's like one of the biggest ones that we all have to prove that we're doing in our online courses is called regular and substantive contact hours. And so it's all about how much time are you spending actually interacting with these students, even if you're an asynchronous course, right? It could be anything, but if you're synchronous, like how much time are you spending actually reaching out to them, making sure that things are working for them? How are you getting that personal human touch and building that rapport with your students? So I know, I always see Denise Maduli Williams, who is a friend of the show. She's always posting her videos on Instagram or whatever that she talked about back a couple of years ago, which was one of our first episodes right as the pandemic was hitting. she was saying, okay, I make these clips on the iPhone using the Clips app, and then she talks to the students, and the text comes up, and she's like, "Hey guys, I'm at the beach, and like, what do you want to do?" Right, and then the students can really connect with that. Like, they see like a little bit of her personal life in a way to show that, like, hey, we are one, we are connected, we are here all doing kind of the same thing. And so I think we can see some of these ideas going on with how we're building that rapport, right? And Esol, I know you use a lot of different techniques to build rapport with your students as well.
Right. For me, rapport and connection, and for my students to know that I do care and I do understand that some of the concepts that we're learning are difficult, but that I care about their academic success or whatever it is that they're hoping to accomplish with English. I want them to know that I do care. That's important, whether it's by talking to them every morning as they're coming in, or whether it's low tech, like I said, a face-to-face conversation, or in an exit ticket that you're asking for them to gauge how they're feeling. It's just so important. That can really make a difference for students who maybe wouldn't have shared anything otherwise.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of these things that we get into. Today we're going to be kind of positioning this in a certain way through some technology that you can use to make this work pretty well. Looking at using forms to help us build some rapport with our students. So I think we're going to jump over.
All right. So recently, Brent, you wrote an article for Tesol Connections. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, do. It's called Get Informed: The Power of Forms to Get to Know Your Students. And of course, Brent and I are both fans of Google, the Google Suite, and all of the apps. And today we're hoping that we can give you some ideas. If you're strapped for what to do, what to apply this time, here's some really, really easy to apply ideas for building rapport using forms.
Yeah.
So Brent, what do you got for us?
Yeah. So when I started writing that article, quite a lot of ideas came, but I also wasn't able to get in everything or every variation. So, feel free to expand, or if anything obviously inspires you here, Esol, of course, right away. But anybody else, please feel free to jump back into the show notes and leave us a message on different ideas and things that you can add to this. But I want to start with one of the ideas inside of here was, a key way to get to know your students is to have them share what's important to them, right? And so at the beginning of the semester, I always run a survey of the students, right? And it's asked a bunch of different questions, and some of them are basic ones like, what's your goal after leaving this school? Are you going to transfer to university? Are you going to get a job? Whatever, right? And some of those things are kind of like whatever. They're just like, students get used to answering them all the time, and so they just kind of have their kind of stock
routine questions.
Right. But then what I've started realizing is that with forms, you can really get into depth, and because you can share links and you can do all sorts of different, like parts of multimedia ideas, and sharing parts, is that you can really actually get to know your students pretty well. And you can also phrase your questions in forms as ways that would encourage them to talk more about whatever it is they're interested in. So I'm going to start off with just a very basic one, which was, instead of someone telling me like, hey, who's your favorite athlete, or who's your favorite artist, or whatever else it is, right? Because they might just write the name of it. Then what I can do instead is I can say, give me a link to the Wikipedia page of your favorite blank, right? Whatever I'm asking of them. So, and they could maybe even choose. I could say like artist / athlete / actor, whatever it is. Why are they all A words? I don't know. But so I could say that, and I say, give me a Wikipedia page, and then I could say, I could follow up with that. I can say, what does it say on there that you think is important? What information do you think is missing about this person that you would think is worth including? And then you can also follow up with, why is this person particularly particularly interesting to you, right? And so as you're going through a couple of these more built out questions, then the students can spend the time to actually think about it and write in an answer. By the way, secret, you're also seeing the quality of their writing as they're giving you these answers, right? This is super important. Right?
I was just going to say that, oh my gosh, that would build a trove of stuff you can look at later, or pick out, and show as examples. Here, take a look at this.
Right. And so you can see where their grammar issues are going, how clearly they communicate inside of their writing, right, etc. But it's just a simple question that gets right to things. But like, I think what happens, and I mentioned this briefly in the article too, is that a lot of teachers kind of ask these closed questions, and it's like, what's the answer? Oh, I like LeBron James, period, right? And it's like, okay, like, cool, but like, LeBron James fans, like, they have all these things that they like about him, right? Like, what makes him cool? Oh, this game when he did this and this and this, right? Or I like how he kind of connects with his community, or whatever else it is, right? And so, are you asking questions in a way that is going to encourage students to open up and talk about the thing, or is it just like kind of running through the routine and like, okay, here we go, checklist, I'm done telling you these things, right? So that's kind of the first thing that you can do.
So another way that students can connect you to something that's interesting to them is sharing a meme that they think is the funniest. So, and this doesn't again, if your student just came from their country and hasn't spent a lot of time in America, or in where we kind of share the same memes in the region, they may have something that you have no idea why it's funny, because it's cultural. And so an example I can give is I asked a class of Japanese students to bring their favorite drink's logo or slogan and explain it to me, because in Japanese they tend to use a lot of English words, but the names don't make sense to me as an English speaker. And so, of course,
Asahi super dry beer. What does that mean?
And so there was one where the story behind the slogan was partly playing on Japanese pronunciation of that word and the symbol in Japanese, and then also on it was a sports drink, so it had to do with energy and leadership in an athlete. And so they went through all this to explain to me something. And again, I would have never known. I just thought, man, this is silly English. Yeah, and maybe this just shows there's like, no, there's actually, but that explanation now became something of an inside joke within those students. And so they would see me buy that drink all the time, and they would talk about those things, and then another one would follow up with, oh yeah, I noticed that there's this brand and this is the slogan and blah blah blah. And so again, it just created ways for them to connect and also be aware of how it could be perceived by someone else, and they would have never known if we hadn't had that initial conversation. So a meme, in this case it wasn't a meme, but a meme could just give birth to so many points of interest, and then it's a conversation generator that's relevant to how they communicate.
I love that idea, because one, they could try and write out their thoughts on it and really kind of spend the time figuring that out. I used to listen to on the podcast Reply All, and they would always have the boss of the company would come in, and like he would bring them like a tweet or a meme or something, and he'd be like, I don't understand what this means. And then they would spend like 45 minutes breaking down the history of all the different aspects of like what you need to know in order to understand this this one joke. And it's like, so it was so fascinating, because it'd be like, they would always say like, the prompt for it would be like, do you understand this? Yes. Do you understand this? Yes. Do you understand this? No. Right. And then they're like, okay, let's get into it. And they would just, like I said, they would just go on and on, because it was fascinating, interesting, but it's so cool to think about how quickly some of us can get something because we have enough context for it, and how much other information you might need to provide for that background context. And then that leaves people the opportunity to really share about things that they know or care about, right? You and I had that too, right? The chancla, which I didn't know about the chancla. And then because like that's not in my culture, but and then I started seeing like the chancla. There was like an internet poster that I saw, or an internet billboard, and it said something like faster than a flying chancla. And so it's like, yeah, okay. So I didn't understand that until you provided me with the context. I mean, that one was a fast and easy one, but like you can really get into that. I think there's a lot.
Yeah, and I think, Brent, it's important. I know we're talking simply, again, for some people might say, it's just a meme, but it's not. It's a way of partaking in a conversation, in a shared experience. And in this case, it's a chancla, but that pulls into the conversation or into the inclusivity students from those cultures, or students who have something similar. And so now you were talking about being included, and we talked about rapport and the human need to be included, to count, right? To be part of the group.
Absolutely. And so just to point out here in forms, so either students could upload a picture of the meme that they're interested in or that they're talking about, or they could link you out to it if they found a link on it. So there's two different ways for you to access it. But you know what I'm thinking now, Esol, is that once you have that, you can also then pull that meme and use that as a blank meme for some activity later on in class, right? So you're collecting information from the students, right? Here's something that I like. Here is there's a joke structure inside of this meme, right? So for example, one of the common ones is the Drake doing the no, like no, and then the yes thing, right? So it's like the thing that we don't like, the thing that we do like, the kind of variations on those. But if the students are posting that, then you're like, okay, well, I know that I can use that as an activity in the future, or an opportunity for those students to connect ideas that we're going to be talking about to the next part of this lesson, or whatever else it is. So I like that idea of keeping that as a repository of resources that you can then kind of cycle back to the students. And again, that rapport is like, hey, I've been paying attention, right? I've been watching what you're doing. I've been watching what you're talking about. I know what you like, and therefore let's keep talking about those and let's keep moving in, right? I think that all ties together.
And by the way, for those of you who were wondering what that Japanese drink was, it's double W. So go look it up and go find out why it's called Double W.
Oh yeah. I was gonna say, like, they're gonna, like, everybody's gonna be listening to you, like, why don't you say the name of the drink?
So you can listen to the end of the segment.
Yeah. Double W. All right. Not Pocari Sweat, which has its own conversations going with it. Although I have to say, Pocari Sweat's like,
or Calpis.
Calpis, yeah. But once I got over those names, they are great drinks.
Yeah.
So okay. So next one up is kind of similar to the Wikipedia one, which is, who should I follow on Instagram or TikTok, right? So we were talking about this pre-show, and Esol, I'm kind of like, I'm pulling away from a lot of social media right now, or at least on my phone, but at the same time, we are going to see students who are highly engaged, and we do see students who are very highly engaged on social media. And so I really like the idea of them like, hey, this is my favorite person on whatever it is, right? And here is a link to their TikToks, or here is a link to their Instagram feed. And so then you could even just spend 30 seconds just going in and getting a little sense of who that person is. Because again, it's the same kind of connection. It's like, hey, whatever this person is doing, I can associate, or I can connect to that, and therefore sharing that out to the teacher gives the teacher the same opportunity to say, okay, I see what you value, I see what matters to you, and being able to link it there.
What's really cool, Brent, is I taught a class a long time ago. It's been a long time ago. It was pre-USC. It was English through humor, and memes. We didn't even have memes at the time. We had like funny clips on
viral videos.
Vine, like viral videos. And so I said, all right, I want you to do the same exact thing. I want you to think of, we talked about what viral videos were. We watched a TED Talk on viral videos, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the students from Saudi Arabia shared Never Say No to Panda. Are you familiar with that video clip?
Is that the one where the panda comes up and smashes the keyboard on the desks and smashes the grocery store up? Yeah.
Yes. And so it's Never Say No to Panda. And that's old now, but it's well known in those regions that speak Arabic. And every once in a while, now in class, it's been like, I feel like it's probably been like 8 to 10 years since that happened. I'll bring up a meme within my slides to the students, and most of my students are now Arabic speakers, so they'll say, "How did you know? How did you?" And they're so like shocked that number one, it's old, and that I know what it is. But again, now it pulls me into their in group, which again, rapport builds a connection, right? And so I think this is great, because then you can take what students have shared with you. 4 years later, now you're playing those, and students are like, "Wait a minute, how did you even know about that?"
Big time. That's a very real thing, especially when it's like older cultural things. But they're like, okay, hold on a second, because you shouldn't know about that. Like, you could do a research on what's popular right now, maybe, but like most people wouldn't have any sense about something 5 years old, 10 years old, right? And I see that all the time. Like when I make jokes about, it's more than 10, but like if I make like a Seinfeld joke, like my students like, I don't know what you're talking about. Right?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So that's great. And I love that, because you can keep that in your head, right? Very cool.
All right. So another thing that you could be asking students to share is the most underrated website. Maybe there is a site that you go to on a regular basis, or some tool that helps you be more productive. But what is it? What's a little known thing that you wish others knew about that you'd want to share? And I've done that with my students too. I've said, like, I want you to think of something that's super cool to you that probably you don't think people know. Let's share that. And every once in a while, it'll be something that they realize, oh, such and such person in the class does know about it, and you didn't know, you thought it was a secret. But again, that creates a connection.
Yeah. I always laugh. I had a friend that always was like, he's like, I'm like, oh, I'll go look this up on IMDb. And he's like, you know about IMDb? And I'm like, yeah, it's like the second biggest website on the internet. Like, yeah, I know about it.
It's like when students come up to me and say, "Teacher, I have this great tool. What is it? What is it? You like technology? It's Duolingo." And it's like, oh, thank you for sharing. I did not know about Duolingo. But for them, the reality is it's a new tool in their country. They may not have ever known about it till they came here. So, but it's cool to see that.
And I've had that too with students, where it's like, once I start opening their eyes to like what technology does, then they start searching for things, right? And so it's totally popular, like well-known Duolingo or whatever else it is, but to them it is new, right? Because they've never considered. You're still going to have students, especially for me, adult students, right? They're like, oh, I've never considered using this as a tool to help me grow my language, right? I've only done this and this, right? I've only done social media, or I've only done text messaging or FaceTiming, right? So yeah, absolutely. And then kind of tying to that too with the apps is favorite app that isn't social media, right? And so I think that one can be a fun one, and maybe sometimes students don't know what they're like what they're actually spending time on. And so sometimes I'll say, hey, go into the settings and see where you're actually spending your time. Like, what apps are you spending your time on? Okay, let's skip the social media ones. What's the one that's not a social media one that you're actually spending the most time on? And they can sometimes be pretty surprised by it, right? They're like, oh, I didn't know that I was spending this much time on my bank app, or whatever else it might be, right? And so then they can give you some insight into like what might be interesting or what might be useful, or sometimes they totally do know, and they're like, oh yeah, I use this other one all the time. It helps me with XYZ, right? And so I really like this idea of like different things that the students can share with you that are just links, right? It's just links, and they can just share out these things quickly to you, and so you can get access. But also I wanted, Esol, for us to jump over to talk a little bit more about different ways that we can use forms, because it's not just about sharing a link or writing things. There's other opportunities as well.
Right. And I think it's important to remind yourself that you're doing with the things you're collecting, you're doing something with them after. And one of my favorites, which I think is just a favorite in general, especially with the low tech version of it, is when you ask a student to bring a photo of someone that's important to them, or something interesting, or a magazine picture that they took. But now you can have students upload those pictures. Right. And so a popular one, of course, would be upload a picture of a pet. And in the case that the student doesn't have a pet, or the pet is a dog or a cat is not what's commonly kept as a pet, maybe upload a picture of a pet you wish you had. I've had this conversation has happened where students love cats, but they can't have cats because they're allergic. And so, but they wish they had a Maine Coon, and then they'd start talking about why they wish they had that cat, which gives you an opportunity to talk, to speak. A picture of their hometown, a place in their hometown. I think a lot of my students in Saudi Arabia will, when I ask them to share a video, usually say, a lot of people think that it's just a desert, and that it never snows, but I actually live in the part of Saudi Arabia, Tabuk, where it snows and it's cold. And so, again, that's also educating for the instructor, because yes, we do have preconceived notions, we have biases, and we also sometimes don't have time we haven't been to that part of the world. But it's important to have that. It could be pictures of family, recently cooked dishes. I know, Brent, that you've done activities, and we shared about what you could actually have students explain the recipe, and then you try the recipe, and then you share what your version of their recipe looked like or tasted like. And again, those are just ways to collect other information, uploading photos. Then you have those photos, and then now you know, oh, this photo comes from Tabuk, an area in Saudi Arabia. And the next time you have students from Saudi Arabia, or don't, you can include that in there and use that as a bank for other activities that you create.
And that's the key part that I want to get to. It's to not forget that, like, same thing. It's like, okay, now I've got 30 students and I've got 30 photos of different pets, right? Well, those can be like backgrounds to slide decks that I make, right? Or those could be pictures for prompts, like writing prompts or discussion activities or different things like that, right? And a student might not think about that at the beginning, but then they're like, oh, wait a second, I shared this, and now we're doing class activities around my own thing, right? And so I think there's a lot of really cool, and again, it's like that whole linking back, like, who am I? Am I being valued in this class? Am I being recognized? Showing those pictures, bringing them back into future activities, whatever else it might be. There can be just so much cool stuff you can do there.
So, Brent, before we move on to the next point, I think I want to share that when students feel connected, that creates a point of reference in their memory where they're going to refer to it and then link up everything they learned. And we had at USC, there's this article that my students had to read, and it was on the potato and how the potato has come to be a staple in our meals, and also what that means, etc. But the article itself was so difficult, and because I used to give a survey at the beginning of the class, I would make sure that anytime we did an activity on the potato experiment or the potato research, which was every time we talked about it, I could see the students like, oh, here we go again. But I would put a little picture somewhere on the worksheet or on the slide that we were talking about of something related to the students' interest. So I had twins that loved basketball. And so I put a little potato playing basketball. And so sure enough, the students who liked basketball just giggled. But again, that creates a reference point. And every once in a while, I'll get a student who's already graduated, maybe finished their PhD, and they're back. And then they'll say like, oh, Missy Shell, I remember you, the potato queen, or but again, the fact that they remember that. Yeah. They remember that. They internalize something about that. They'll never forget that darn article.
Yeah, making those connections direct, and even if it doesn't feel like it, even if it's kind of irrelevant, like it's just kind of for fun. But I like that idea, right? And so that's visual. You're creating a visual, but there's other ways of that aren't visual, and you're going to share something with us. Yeah. So we said, student can upload photos, and then there's like all these audio options now too, which is so cool. So I've talked about Mote a few times, and I use Mote a lot for voice feedback for articles that we're writing, or students are writing an article or writing a document, and then I'll go and leave a Mote voice feedback for them. But what you can do also with Mote that's pretty cool is you can bring it right into to Google Forms. And so you can actually record a piece of audio on Moat, and then you can have that be your prompt for a question. So all you have to do is, once you have Moat installed, you can actually just click on the Moat button and just say, hey, I want this to be my audio, or to be the recording. And if students have Moat installed on their Chrome browser, then when they go and look at the form, they can click on a button and they can actually listen to you, and then they can hear the spoken prompt, and then they can respond to that, right? And so you could, of course, test your students to see if they're hearing differences between things like minimal pairs, right? That would be a simple, obvious one. Or you could kind of give them some complicated phrases that might be misunderstood, and kind of say like, okay, how would you answer this? And so then they could go and try and listen. One thing is a little hint for everybody is that Moat does have the transcribe option, and so like it'll AI the transcript of whatever you say. And so, but what you can go back in is you can go edit the transcription, and you can just say, I just typed it in. So as a sample, Esol, pre-show we did this, and I said whatever I said, and then I could just go delete the transcription that they put in, and I could just say listen to the audio, or click the play button to listen to the audio. So it doesn't sneakily give away the words of what you're saying, so you can actually challenge the students to listen to it directly.
You just gave me an idea for something that's become a problem here and there in an activity that I do, where I'm asking a question that says, it's a question where students have to rephrase, and the question, one of the key questions says, pets make people live a happier life. And quite a few students hear it as bets. BET, and one student responded with, gambling is not allowed. So I realized, wait a minute, because he never mentioned gambling till the end. He kept saying bets, bets, bets. Of course, he was from an Arabic speaking country. So I didn't actually understand until the end when he said something about gambling, and using Moat would actually help me to see what they're hearing. And then also help them to see, like, can you go back and listen to see where I said pets and not bets?
Yeah, for sure. So those types of things could come up all the time, and you might not have noticed it if it was written out, but when you see it, when you hear, when you're listening to it, you're like, oh, wait a second, now I kind of see what's going on. The second part to that is that if students have it installed on their browser, then they can go in and leave voice messages as responses to your forms as well. And so the way that works is they're going to click on the little Moat button in there, and they'll be able to record. And I think with the student's account, they can get like 30 seconds for free or something like that. So it'd be fairly short responses. But again, they could click and they could record, and then it's going to put a link to that in your spreadsheet. And so you can just go right down the line. So the Google Forms all turn into, the answers all get put into a spreadsheet, and you can just go down the line, and you can hover over and click on it, and you don't have to leave the spreadsheet to listen to each student's answer, right? And so that can be, again, like all this effort we put into like trying to be like, hey, let's record, let's get audio, let's get this thing and this thing, and it's like can be really complicated, where this might be just a really simple way to collect people's voice and hear what they have to say with things as well. So I do want to kind of encourage people to look at Moat. I guess I should point out I'm an ambassador, I think, but I don't really know
full disclosure.
Yeah, full disclosure. I'm still paying for my account, so don't worry about it. But it's a really powerful tool, and I really love the power of voice with that. And so, traditionally we think of forms, we're like, okay, it's going to be written word all the time, but now we're looking at all these different ways that we can use forms. We've got visual options, we've got writing options, we've got audio options, all sorts of cool things. So I really love how you can kind of play around with the choices here.
So one of the things I talked about earlier was customizing worksheets to have either items that your students provided from something you've collected, or simply customizing prompts to include areas of interest for the students. Low-tech version is you're creating them as you're going along. Students do notice. And of course, the low-tech version is a questionnaire, simply the questionnaire. It could be a little bit higher tech, which is you're doing it on forms. But Brant, you've got a faster, more efficient way for the teachers that don't have 10 students in the class like I happen to have. That's the most, 10 or 11 at the super max. But many of us don't have that luxury.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
30, 40, 50 recently in a workshop I did.
Yeah, for sure. So if you can collect that information easily from them, that's great. Well, Esol, before we jump into kind of the tech solution to customizing prompts, I do want to kind of share because one of the things that I always do, and I share this idea, is when you're I also collect students' favorite songs.
Oh yes,
and,
yes,
and
yes,
we skipped that part, right? So I want to talk.
That's
about that.
That's a fun one.
Yeah, because you also did this on paper, right? And it worked out for you. So what happened for you when you did that?
So students will sometimes share. Well, first they'll be hesitant if they're sharing someone that I don't know, or they think I don't know because it's someone from in their own language or their own culture. And I said, doesn't matter, doesn't have, or they don't know anything about American singers or English singers. And so I say, no, from your country, that's fine. Just write it out. Give me the title, no problem. And what I did is I ended up, sometimes they think I don't know, but I've heard of them because other students have mentioned them. But I just created a playlist, just a YouTube playlist. And then every once in a while, when we're playing music in the background and students will perk up and say, I love this song. That's my favorite song.
That's my jam.
I know. How did you know? I just know everything. I could just have this feeling. And then the student, later realizes, because it was really bothering him, like, how did she know? The song was not in English. So how did she know? Well, then he realized, oh, I know you got it from that questionnaire or that survey. Like, yeah, I was paying attention. Those things I give you to fill out, everything has a purpose in my classroom. Yeah. Everything has a purpose.
Yeah, I love that. And same thing, you can do it with a quick link in a YouTube video to the forums. And so I just have to click once, click twice, and say add to playlist. And then I've got my list real quickly over the course of the semester.
The high-tech version, means you're literally not wasting any time searching for something, because then you could find the wrong thing, right? If you collect it, you could find the same. I mean, how many songs called Sakura are there? Probably a lot. So again, if the student's giving you the link, all you're doing is adding to a playlist, and then you can recycle that playlist, because chances are those songs are still popular or well known with another group of students. And so then you're just building.
So I love that. It's a really quick, easy way to go. And then the last one, when you're really talking about this customization, and this is getting pretty nerdy, but there might be a few people out here who are like, oh, that's actually something kind of cool, which is that once you've collected, or you've got all your students' names in a spreadsheet, right? You've got all of their answers. Hey, what are your hobbies? Whatever your things are, you can actually use Autocrat. So Autocrat is an extension in Sheets, and what you can do with that is you can export that data out to a Google Doc as a mail merge. And so what that means is, like, a mail merge is kind of a techie thing that you can do when you have a spreadsheet. And so, for example, like when you get an email, Esol, that says, "Hi Esol, how are you doing today?" Right? They never wrote your name out there, right? They're just pulling your name from the database. Sorry, your students did, of course, but like when Converse writes to you, there's no person out there writing to you directly, right? So what they're doing is they're plugging in first name, right? So they go, okay, Eshol's your first name. We're going to plug that in here after the word hi. Okay. So as a teacher, we can actually do this. We can create an entire, worksheet of different activities, whatever they are. And anytime you have a student's name or a person's name, you can actually just say, okay, student name, right? And so you can have that be a snippet of tiny code. It just goes right in there. And then when you run this program called Autocrat, you can actually just click it, and it can pull different students' names and plug them all into the worksheets or the activities that you've already built. And so then it can be totally customized to your current class, right? Also, if you're saying, hey, it's going to be sports, right? And so if you've got that sports column of like, hey, what's your favorite sport? If that's one of the questions you ask your students, well, now you could say, okay, it's going to plug in, it's going to talk about basketball every time, or oh, it's going to talk about soccer, right? Or it's going to pull from different varieties of these every time that you do it. So I know it sounds a little bit complicated, but if you're really trying to get this customized, one, AutoCrat's a great thing to learn because you can do things like make certificates and kind of customize.
It's really efficient.
Yeah, it really is.
Like, especially if you've got a large class of students and not just one class, but 3 classes a week, and you've now topped 120 students or more. I think this is a great way to still personalize and not spend or not give up personalization for the sake of saving time.
Yeah, and I've seen both ways. I've seen some teachers that are just going in, they're like, I'm just changing all the names of all these things for my students this semester. And I've done that in the past. And it's like, do I really want to do that? And then I give up, right? And it's like, okay, let's just go with, John and Sarah as our, whatever names they are. And so it's like, so I like this idea that it's going to link back and the little bit of time up front, but then saves a bunch of time on the end and has the benefits of all these, these points of connection that we've been talking about here. So, that's a lot to share. Everybody, good luck. But again, it's really just playing with it, right? Getting started with it. You can play with 1 or 2 things and see how it works. And then you can kind of keep adding this over the semesters as you keep going forward.
All right, it is time for our fun finds. And I feel like maybe I shared this before, but again, I'm refinding it. Okay. So it is Ipodaro, and that is my hair salon. I'm very picky when it comes to hair, and recently I chopped it all off.
Oh, yeah.
And I went with a short bob, like a just very short haircut, which is dangerous if you've never had
the Bieber bob.
Bieber bob. But my hairstylist is so well. She's just experienced in cutting hair, and she knows my hair. But the reason why I'm promoting her salon really is she does everything organic. She wants to make sure that the products she's using are not going to harm the environment. They're not going to stay there long. They're not going to harm your skin. And so she takes great care to be a mentor to other to up and coming hairstylists. So if you're in the San Antonio area, Ipodaro. She also does a lot of charity work, giving back to the community. So if you're not in the San Antonio area and you want to support this kind of place, you can. She's doing fundraisers all the time for cancer, for kids. She does free haircuts for back to school. She collects lots of things to give to them in their backpacks. There are ways, and if there's a place in your community that is doing something like this, such as a hair salon, support them. But Ipodaro.
Cool.
What do you got, Brent?
Mine.
What funky, quirky, strange thing do you have?
Yeah, so mine is a Netflix show.
Okay.
It's called God's Favorite Idiot. It's the new Melissa McCarthy show. And it's just a sitcom, but it's really fun and lovely. I'm a little sad at the title because, the main character, I guess, is God's favorite idiot. But like the main character is so pure and like so like I really enjoyed the character where it's like it's the story is. I had no idea what I was getting into going in, and of course Netflix posters are terrible and don't give you any good sense. They're the worst. But I was just like, okay, I guess I'll just check this out. It's kind of showing up. It was a random choice, and then I'm like, oh, this is a Melissa McCarthy show. Like I love her jokes and all the stuff that she comes up with, but anyways, so the main character is, I think it's actually Melissa McCarthy's husband in real life. His name is Ben Falcone, but his character kind of gets chosen by God to spread the word of God, and at the same time there's Satan's coming around and trying to destroy everything, but the characters are just so kind of pure, and it's like really focused in on these relationships that these individual characters are trying to build with each other as they're going through kind of potentially the end of the world, but nobody recognizes that it's the end of the world except for them. And so his character, though, has really drew me in because he is pure, because he doesn't really take offense to things. He's just kind of like, oh, that's what you're saying. All right, well, let's just keep moving forward. And I think we're in such this polarized world right now that it's like seeing someone who's not trying to be polarizing, even though his character ultimately, in certain ways, of course, there's people who are opposed to him because he's saying he's spreading the word of God, but it's also like his real attitude towards it is very much like, oh, I guess this is just kind of what I have to do, and this is the thing going on, right? And so excellent character development, a lot of fun kind of silly jokes, and not too serious. I mean, it's a really well done show. I was very impressed and surprised at how much I ended up liking it, especially because I just kind of stumbled across it. But it is called God's Favorite Idiot, and it is available on Netflix.
Great. I needed something for my Netflix list because eerie things keep popping up. True crime stuff. And right now I kind of want to stay away from it.
I take a breather from that, have a little bit more fun. I think you'll like it.
All right. Thank you for supporting the show by listening. And if you'd like, you can become a patron on Patreon. You can also share the show with a colleague. Sharing is caring. You can leave us a shout out or a review on Apple
Podcasts.
You can leave us a shout out with a review on Apple Podcasts, or if you're giving us a shout out any other way, tag us on social media. We are on all the platforms. Brent will not be on all the platforms.
I will not be, but that's okay. All right. So for show notes, of course, you can find it on diesel.org/69, and you can listen to us at Voice Ed Canada. That's voiced.ca. I still do have Twitter, and I still have all these things. I'm just not on my phone. So that's it. So Twitter, the show is at DieselPod, and I am at Brent G. Warner.
I'm Esol at Ixy_Pixie. That's IXY_PIXY.
In Hindi, thank you is Dhanyavad. So Dhanyavad for tuning in to the Diesel podcast. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
See you next time.